We have a live stream, so that's exciting.
Yay, it worked.
We'll get started here pretty soon, but I'm just waiting for everybody to finish trickling in. Susan, I want to be wherever your background is right now.
Hey, Christy, did you already make me
Said me
co-host?
too.
I did not, but I will.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Reminder.
Yeah.
All right, Dana, you should be good. On the
Okay,
co-host.
thank you.
Mhm.
No problem.
All right, we're still missing a few folks, so I'm gonna give everybody like 2 more minutes.
Christy, it's Carolyn.
Yeah.
I'm here, but I'm not 100% here. I gotta get a couple other things from the other room,
Okay.
but I'm here.
No
Barely.
worries. No
I actually
worries.
came up with my capstone idea.
Nice.
I'm like, so that's why I didn't work on the design stuff because I had to get that, and then I can have fun with that. So,
It's all good.
all right.
We
Shall
changed all the instructors all talked, and we changed it so that all the assignments will be due on Sunday night, like from now on. So like we'll be giving you guys assignments during the week, and obviously
And then-
like if you have time to do them then it's great, but
And then we can plan accordingly. All right. I shall return.
we know that being part of this boot camp means that you have approximately 1,000 things going on all at once. So
Excuse me, Christy.
Mhm.
Does that mean that there's still going to be a mix? Like some of them will be brief and some of them will be, okay. Thanks.
yeah, so you're still gonna have a longer weekend assignment, but it's like and there'll be shorter ones during the week, but we're just not like they don't have to be done unless the instructor says like this definitely needs to be done before class tomorrow. The general rule is we're just gonna make them due at the end of the weekend. So, Ariel, do you have a question?
Yeah, do we go through like we did the time management thing, but like in order to cover the capstone, the employment part, and then the lessons and any extra work you need to do to make sure you grasp it, is there any tricks maybe you or some of the other instructors had you guys could maybe put in Slack regarding how you went about that? Because I'm like piling it up day by day, and that's obviously not going to work for long.
Mm-hmm. Like you're looking for tricks specifically around how to keep up with everything, or
I guess, because I mean, everybody's schedule is different. I'm aware of that, but like I noticed like I'm falling behind in the career, but the capstone's farther than I thought it would be. And then like the home, you know what I mean? So I didn't know if you guys
Mhm.
just had any in general time management tips when you guys did it, if you figured out like how much to spend each day kind of thing or anything like
that's a good question. And Caitlin and Dana, feel free to dive in or chime in here as well, because you guys have been through this process once. But I mean, I think I would really suggest like trying to block off time each week, like that you know that you can have time to like work on assignments. So like and basically pile up stuff, like knowing that like that's what you're going to work on during those times. That's honestly what I do with like stuff during the week too, like for work. If I have a bunch of meetings, I'll even block off time on my calendar and be like, nope, this is time that I am like just working on projects. So that way you don't feel like you're constantly like you have to be working 100% of the time, but you also like still are saving a decent amount of time to actually work on stuff. That's my sort of time management strategy as a natural procrastinator. So Dana and Caitlin might have other suggestions.
I can chime in next. Remember at the very beginning, Max mentioned like I was a star note taker. My week, because I worked during the week and because I have a child at home who also required my attention, my week was mostly devoted to making sure my notes were together for the assignment, reviewing any parts of video or my notes that I didn't understand, and then reaching out for help during the week. And then I would take time between Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to actually do the work. So that's how my week was spent. I just took advantage of, all the instructional time. I attended office hours when I could, but I didn't attend as many as some folks. And towards the end, I think I stopped coming for whatever reason. Probably was working another job on the weekend, but that's how I spent my time. And that seemed to really, really work for me because I can't really even approach a project until I feel like I somewhat know what I'm doing. And as long as I have that clear understanding, then I can dive in. So yeah, just note taking, reviewing videos if needed. And on the weekend was the, dive into the project or the capstone. And then Monday, come ready with any questions or anything. Like if I mistakenly thought that I was ready and I really wasn't, I would just come armed with my questions on Monday. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
actually better than what I was attempting to do. Okay, so many career things and then part of the capstone and then the classes. And of course, like, everybody's schedule is different. So some nights I have to do the review class. So I was trying to get a little bit each day to make it easier, but that I wanted to make sure we could block off time to do like 5 to 7 tasks on capstone versus 5 job thing, so that works. Thank you.
Yeah, because you have your Friday, Saturday, and Sunday that you don't have to spend 3 hours in class. So you totally need to be using that time to your advantage. So yeah. So that's it for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're trying to structure this class like with the knowledge that you guys have a lot of other stuff going on. And so part of that is, it's part of the reason we talked about some of the project management stuff early on, is that we really want you guys to figure out a project management flow that works for you and for your schedule, right? So it's a figuring out, okay, how do I create a list of stuff so that I know what I need to do when I have time to do it, but it doesn't have to all be like, it all needs to be done approximately by the deadlines, but the deadlines are set up. There's a lot of flexibility for you guys to kind of do things when you have a chance.
And I think that if you're just cleaning up your notes and asking questions during the week, that counts towards the little bit. I mean, that's still your knowledge base counts towards your project time. So you need to go armed if you feel like the weekend is when you're going to be able to make the most impact on your homework and your projects, then you need to be armed with as much organized information as you possibly can get during class time and office hours so that you can do that deep dive over the weekend.
Yeah, and definitely also don't be afraid to ask questions like at the time that you guys have them. So the really nice thing about Slack is it's asynchronous, right? So you can leave instructors a message or like even leave messages for each other if you like, as long as you use that @ in the person's name, and they can get back to you when they have a chance to get back to you. So if you have a question and it's 2 in the morning, like most likely nobody's going to respond at that hour. I'm not awake at that hour, but like, you can ask the question and somebody will get back to you when they see it. So just another piece, like we're happy to have you guys like ask all the questions during class, but you're also welcome to ask questions at other times and people will answer them. It just might not be like, immediate.
Do we know when the office hours are for this weekend?
Yeah, sorry, I saw that question. I wasn't ignoring it. There. So I don't know if we have, between Dana and Caitlin and I, actually figured that out. But what you guys have been doing 11 a.m. on Saturdays? Is that the last few weeks?
Generally, it's been that, but last week it was Friday because Max was actually out of town on Saturday. He was traveling, so we did Friday last week. But generally, it's been like Saturday morning, sometime around 11-ish. As long as that continues to work well for everybody, I feel like that's a good time. Not too big of a gap between class and then office hours, but it's definitely flexible.
So I can tell you all that I am doing, since I'm covering website accessibility tomorrow and Thursday, it just turned out, it was just such a coincidence that I'm also doing something for Women in Code. Same accessibility talk, uh, just half the time, a little less than half the time. So I will actually be on and live from 10 to 12 this Saturday morning for anyone who would have any continuing questions about what I present in the tools that I give to you. So I certainly welcome you to join that. I will get the meetup link and I'll put it in the chat so that if you want to sign up for that, then that's fine. And Christy, I say that to say that if you wanted to do office hours outside of that, I would be available, but I'm not available from the 10 to 12. But for, if anybody just wants to devote time to website accessibility for 2 hours, that's how long my presentation is.
Yeah, and I actually was just realizing, so I actually can't do 11 a.m. on Saturday. I just realized normally I would be able to, but we have, it's actually, we're celebrating my daughter's birthday. So doesn't work too well there. But so I can do the afternoon, Saturday afternoon, or I could also do Sunday afternoon if people are available. So I think like probably the easiest for me anyways is 1 to 3, 1 to 4 in that range. But I don't know if nobody else is available at that time, then that's not helpful. Caitlin, what is your?
I'm pretty flexible, we're just remodeling our bathroom. So I can just take a break whenever I'm home all day, all weekend. So yeah, if you want, I could just put a poll in Slack in the student channel, and then you guys can answer the poll and we can kind of get like a general consensus, majority vote type thing. So yeah, if you just give me a couple of time frames, I can put that in there.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, cool. So let's do stand up questions, things you guys are mulling over, things you've noticed in life, in the news.
I didn't like my score from the homework. I'm a newbie.
It's okay. Believe it or not, I actually got a newbie score on that as well, which is part of why I was like, don't pay attention to the score. I mostly wanted you guys to play with like how it affects the legibility on stuff, because it's kind of hard to see that in like that kind of focused way in normal life.
Yeah, and don't forget that the score, if you didn't get what you were hoping, it just means that you need to make more progress, not that you failed. But think of this in terms of a job performance. When you present your project or whatever you're working on to your boss, they're going to let you know whether or not it cuts the mustard. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been sent back to my office to rework something. And oh gosh, I mean, it just totally deflates you when you're like, I got this presentation, it's on and popping. My boss is gonna love it. And I remember when I was a young supervisor, my boss said, well, I'm sure that you can understand what you're saying, but since I don't talk technologies, you need to go back and put this in layman's terms so that I can understand it, because if I don't understand it, the rest of the counselors aren't going to understand it. And yeah, come back when you put it in some language that we can understand. It was so deflating. So, I mean, you get a score, but just imagine being on the job and having that happen. You don't get a score. You get 3 or 4 hours or maybe a whole day or 2 or a week worth of extra work. And I saw you all laughing at me when I said that.
That really cuts the mustard.
Yeah, so it's really, and I love that, that we all agreed to that point system, because it's either you made the progress that you needed to make or you didn't.
I think he was talking, there's actually the little test game thing I gave everybody to do last night
Oh.
is like, he's pretty harsh in terms of like how many points he gives you, how close you get.
Okay. Oh, thank you for
so-
clarifying. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. Like I said, I think I got like a type newbie as well, and I was just like, thanks. It's all good. Anybody else? Questions? Things you're thinking about? Had a really good day? Bad day?
Good day. Because I think I came up with my capstone idea, as I told you a few minutes ago.
Exciting.
And that's been really hard. So hopefully people like it. It's not going to really be plugged into real world databases because I think that would be a lot at this point. So I'm going to like make a sample database of my own stuff. But I think, and I can use Dana's assistive stuff in there. And so, yeah. So I'm happy because that everything else went on hold while I tried to figure out what is it I want to do. And so I watched, the things from Cohort 1, and I didn't get ideas per se, but something about watching got the brain going. And I just, I'm kind of back to where I sort of was before, but it's a little more defined. So
Awesome.
TBD on Thursday.
Yeah,
So-
you guys will. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm done.
Somebody else is talking now.
To piggyback off of Carolyn, so like Thursday, like I have the concept outlined, but Thursday, am I supposed to have like 3 or 4 pages of website created for it already?
No, I'm pretty sure that what Jesse was looking for was really a concept, right?
Okay. I was reading that
Yeah.
outline for the capstone, and it says I am prepared to do 3 or 4 pages of front end. I was like, oh shoot. So the parameters for Thursday, yeah, I do have the concept knocked out.
And this is
I-
all, yeah.
I even
Yeah.
have,
Well, and
a
your homework assignment for this weekend is going to be capstone related too. So like that's part of why we wanted you guys to have like kind of a foot in the door in terms of where like the direction you're headed with your capstone, because
Okay,
we want you to
good.
be able to spend some time kind of working on it and
okay, that's the
pushing
next
things
step.
out a little bit
Good.
more. So
Good.
Um,
Okay.
Yeah, they, contrary to how it might feel, Code Camp is not trying to kill us.
yep, there's just
It-
a lot of information.
Yeah,
it's
no,
a
no,
lot
I'm
of
cool
work
with that. I'm
and a
cool
lot of
with that.
information in a short
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
but it's so well taught and so well supported, and the videos help, and everyone in it is just amazing. I'm so happy to be part of
Yes,
this
me
group.
too.
And you're all so cool. But it's like they aren't trying to break us. They want us to succeed.
Oh yeah,
Because
I know.
And bottom line, if you don't succeed, it reflects poorly on the boot camp, right?
Mm.
I mean, there's more to it than that, but I mean, so they're not going to tell us things like that. That'll,
No, I was.
we're good. I hope
what
not.
was it? Yeah, but I'm playing catch up as I was.
Oh, me
looking
too.
out.
Me
But
too.
I was making sure what I read in the capstone outline. I thought I heard something different in the lecture, so I was just making sure that I was on pace with you guys, which I'm so glad I am right now. All right.
I think we're all good.
Can I throw out a capstone B concept, Professor, to you?
Sure.
Hey, I was thinking the other day, so my first capstone has to deal with academia and student achievement gap in STEM. But then the second one that hit me like a lightning bolt was, when you take the Central bus and the schedule pops up in bullets. But then there, I got to click on over to my alarm to set it 5 minutes ahead of time to make sure that I don't miss the bus. And I was like, well, wouldn't that be a neat like interface app to, if you select that schedule, it makes the alarm for you, less thumb work. But I don't know if that's, you got to talk to Central or whatever. I don't know.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Because my capstone, the original idea started exactly where you are. My focus was a little bit different. And I sent the email to Central, letting them know, requesting access to their API endpoints. They sent me something back almost immediately. We went through the class with Ryan, where Ryan showed us how to send out, to do what we needed to do to get access to that information. And so I kept getting stuck, went to one of the instructors who tried to help me. He couldn't get access to it either. Come to find out, there is a middleman that the people at Central deal with. What happened is the middleman gives them an access code. They gave me something, but because I was not Central, I could not get in. And so what that instructor told me was, you would have to call Central and have Central reach out to the vendor to give you access. I did not realize that accessing API endpoints could get that deep. And at that point, I switched my capstone.
Okay.
So when we tell you that you're going to learn, and you may come across things that will change your focus or will put you in a situation where you need to change your capstone completely, you may run into that, because I ran onto that very early on.
Yeah, I would encourage you guys that, like, you guys are still really early on in the capstone process. Any and all the ideas, like, write them down, because you, like Dana said, you may end up, like, you may hit a dead end that is so big that you have to pivot later on. So having all the ideas is a good thing. And plus, having all the ideas is also helpful, because the instructors, part of our job moving forward is to help you guys, like, narrow down, right, the scope of your projects, because the things that seem really simple are often much bigger in scope than you think. So as someone that just spent the last week rebuilding a checkbox, sometimes the simple things are a lot more complicated than you think. It's just but you guys just don't have the technical experience to be able to vet that stuff out for yourself. And frankly, even when you do, it's easy to do it wrong. So it's a checkbox with a mobile app. So it was a custom checkbox with a mobile app. It was a fun time. Anyways, the point is, like, having more ideas is not a bad thing, right? In the same sense that, like, when you're brainstorming, it's okay to have all the ideas, right? And then once you have all the ideas on the board, it gives you a chance to, like, kind of vet, right? You can vet and narrow, and it's going to make your life simpler moving on, like, farther down the road. So
if you were done with your point, I wanted to offer Corey the light at the end of the rainbow when I had to shift, because I don't know why I didn't think it before. I'm sorry, I'm a little slow tonight. I could have finished that story all in one pass. But anyways, what happened was, once I got over my disappointment with how it ended with me trying to get into Central, somewhere in conversation, I just said, you know what, let me just do a national search on the internet to see if there's any bus system that might have created a similar model that's open source. And guess who I found? Ithaca. Cornell has a technology group that has their system is all open source. And guess what, Corey? All of the code is already sitting in GitHub. It's already there. And once you learn enough of what you need to learn, you may go looking for it and understand enough of what you're seeing to maybe model your idea based on reaching into their system.
Right.
It's all there with all of their streets and bus times and bus routes and everything else. It is absolutely amazing.
I will talk to you during office hours sometime this weekend.
Listen, that's all I have for you, bud. I had already switched gears by then. When I found it, I looked at it and I said, oh my gosh, if I could have just found this week's earlier. I'm just letting you know that it's sitting there just waiting for you if that's something that you want to pursue. So not
Definitely wanna-
Centra, but definitely you want to do a search for it's either Ithaca Technology Group or Cornell University Technology Group and their bus system, whatever it's called. And if I still have old notes on that, I'll pull it up for you.
Awesome. Thank
All
you.
right, Christy,
Well, and
I'm
there's
done.
also, yeah. Oh, you're good. I was just thinking along those lines, actually, I would Google around the Central stuff too, because I think that they might have partnered with the city to make an open source API at this point. But I can't remember when I saw that news article. I did see a news article about something along those lines, but yeah, and there's, yeah, talk to the different teachers about like data you're interested in accessing and things like that, because like the chief technology officer for the city of Syracuse has been really involved in Hack Upstate and hackathons in the past, and like they have a lot of data that they've open sourced that's like city related data, which is pretty cool. Anyways, that's a sidebar for Capstone stuff. Anybody else have questions? We should probably move on to responsive page design, but if anybody else has questions, I want to give a chance to ask them. All right. Obviously, you can still ask questions later. This is not the last chance to ask questions tonight. All right. You guys are looking at, oh, the wrong thing. There we go. Giving you a preview. All right, so we're talking about responsive page layout tonight. So I know you guys have talked a little bit about responsive design and that kind of stuff. What comes to mind when you hear the words responsive page layout? Flex, mobile, those are definitely related. Auto reformatting, yeah, definitely. Responding to different devices. Yeah, media queries are definitely a huge part of responsive page layouts. Yeah, those are all super good things, and they're all definitely related to responsive page layouts. So we talked a little bit about this last night, but one of the really difficult things about designing for digital is that you don't get to control what devices that people use to actually look at your stuff. So you have to, with the best of your ability, plan for the devices that people are going to be using. So companies have a bunch of different ways of doing this, but largely, especially if you're working on existing applications or you're working with an existing customer base, a lot of companies will spend time digging through the data that they have about their customers to understand what types of devices they need to be making sure that they support. So not just like, okay, we need to have a mobile size, like what size of mobile do we really need to have? Like what are the majority of our customers, what types of devices are they accessing our content with, right? So that's just a big part of like understanding that. And so then generally companies will have essentially like a list of supported devices. It's not that those are the only devices you're allowed to look at something with. It's just those are the list. That's like the list that most developers will use to test their experiences with. Because if you know that 90% of your customers are accessing your content using an iPhone, like you probably need to be a little bit less worried about how it looks on Android, right? You still want to make sure that it works because you don't want anybody to have a breaking experience, but like you're gonna spend a greater amount of your time, right, paying attention to iPhone than you are to Android. Just an example. Same thing with like Mac and PC. Yep, definitely. To what Dana said, you can't control stuff, so you just have to plan and do your best. There's a big issue that happens a lot in software development where it's somebody files a bug report and the developer comes back with, it's not happening on my machine and I can't replicate it. Because technology is very contextual, and sometimes there's other stuff happening kind of underneath the scenes that like other programs that might be like influencing that kind of stuff. It happens a lot more with desktop and like mobile applications than it does with like websites, but it's just an important part of knowing that that's part of something that can be happening is important. You end up learning how to ask a lot of really good questions about like, what type of device are you on? What browser are you using? How old is the browser? Is it up to date? All of those fun things affect things. So like I said, page layouts, they need to be ready to flex, adapt. You guys mentioned a lot of those things. Supporting different required types of sizes, functionality, and also, frankly, adjusting content based off of device. So when I say that, I don't mean like you're going to hide important content. What I mean is you're going to prioritize making sure that the most important content is accessible in all places, right? So this is a big part of like mobile first, is making sure that your core functionality works for someone who's using it on a phone. And then you can add in additional functionality for people who are on larger devices as the page gets bigger, right? But like most importantly, so like in an e-commerce context, for example, like if someone who's on a mobile phone can't add a product to cart, like that's a problem, right? That's a core functionality piece they have to be able to do, and they have to be able to do it easily. So like that's something you solve for first, and then you worry about like some of the like nice to have things fall into buckets often. It's like must have, nice to have, like this is a shit, like it would be good if we had this kind of a thing, right? So trying to like really thinking through how you prioritize stuff, making sure that those top priority core functionality things are accessible no matter what device you're using. And a big part of this also is just practicing laying things out in different sizes. And I would strongly encourage you guys, we're going to do a bunch of playing with different like existing websites in responsive mode in your browser so that you can see how they like interact. Like the browser can spoof how they interact on different devices. Get used to looking at other websites in different sizes than just your desktop or your phone, because it kind of helps your brain start to like notice the patterns of what other website designs are doing with those different sizes. Because part of layout in the digital space is thinking, okay, I'm going to start with a mobile layout, but I have to have in the back of my head what's going to happen once the screen gets bigger, right? Like what kinds of things am I going to be adding? How are the elements on the page going to shift once there's more space? And I wish that there was just like a hard and fast rule that I could be like, just use these particular types of things and it'll make it way easier. And there are a few things like that, like you'll start noticing once you start, like we're done kind of digging into this a little bit more, you guys are going to start noticing stuff like a suspiciously large number of websites use card layouts for things. Card layouts are awesome. They're super easy to flex across different device sizes because at the smallest size, you have a single card, right? You can just go like a stack of single cards. And then at the largest size, the cards can go next to each other to as many wide as you want them to be, right? And so a lot of companies have chosen to break their content down into these sort of like bite-sized card layouts because they're really simple to be adjustable across tons of different devices. And actually the graphic on the screen kind of shows that, right? You have this like the stacked cards versus like the card that gets bigger and then the two cards next to each other. And then when you get to desktop and like tablet and or laptop and desktop, there's 3 across. Like that's a very common pattern. But when you're working in mobile, you have to think, okay, yeah, are these cards, yeah, we're gonna move these cards around, right? And so responsive design and mobile first are probably the 2 most common like buzzwords you're going to hear related to flexible page layout. So responsive design or like mobile first, frankly, a lot of companies talk mobile first and then fail to execute on it. There was a really interesting article I read like a long time ago, probably 5 or 6 years, about how the New York Times, like their data had shifted and all of a sudden, a majority of their customers were actually accessing the New York Times on their mobile devices, which in this day and age is shocking to no one because maybe I'm not the only one that answers their personal email almost 100% on my mobile phone. So, and a lot of people interact with news sites and things like that, mobile, like pretty much on their phones, since phones have kind of replaced like physical newspapers in most people's lives. So what they did actually, they realized that all the people in the organization were actually interacting with their content on a desktop all day, right? Like the people that work for them, the reporters, the people doing marketing, like all that stuff were working, they're looking at their website completely on a desktop. But that's obviously a huge like experience shift, right? From looking at it on a phone. So they actually they figured out in the IT department how to default everyone's browser to a mobile device size, so that they had to they challenged everyone in the company for like a week to interact with the content of the website only on like a mobile device, either on a mobile device or in a mobile-sized browser on their computer. And it like completely changed how they approached the content they were like both creating and how they were serving it up, right? For mobile, because it's shifting that mindset, even though they may have been designing mobile first, right? They weren't approaching their content, approaching the things that they were putting out actually in a mobile first, like a mobile optimized way, because naturally you optimize stuff for the way that you interact with it. So if you're always interacting with it on a computer, it's, you know, then you're naturally gonna prioritize the desktop version over the mobile version. So figuring out how to help companies really approach things from this is optimized for a phone layout approach is complicated, but people figure out, like I said, they figure out creative ways to do it. And whether it's stuff like redesigning a website, but only showing the mobile designs to start with, to people to get the idea of like, this is what it's going to look like on this experience, to frankly, just like forcing people to use their mobile devices to access content. There's all kinds of stuff. It's actually one of the fun things about InVision when it first came out is it has the ability to, you can actually download an InVision app so that you can push like functional prototypes to the InVision app as like you're logged into the team. And you can see those prototypes in the context of a mobile device, which is kind of neat. Another really good thing about being mobile first, and actually like that sort of mind shift of being mobile first, is that, so media queries, I think, are some of you guys used to, like, did you guys interact with media queries in terms of like the CSS kind of classes, like lessons and things you did before you started? If you have an idea of what a media query is, can you give me a thumbs up? All right, I'm seeing enough not thumbs up that I'm going to explain what a media query is real quick. So a media query essentially lets you target CSS styling specifically at like a page width. So it can be page width, it can be a bunch of things, but page width is sort of the primary one that people use to basically say these sets of styles, they only apply if the width on this page is at least 767 pixels. That number seems super random until you realize that 768 pixels is actually a standard size for a 7-inch tablet that's vertical. So a lot of the numbers on these things, like I didn't explicitly like include a list of them in the resources because they're really easy to find like Googling. But if you look up like typical screen sizes for things, there's like sort of standard ratios for stuff. We're going to talk about it a little bit farther on, but there's kind of like typical ranges for when different devices tend to kick in. It obviously depends on like retina screens and all of that kind of stuff. But just that's the idea essentially. It lets you essentially say like only apply these styles if this particular parameter is met. And a common one is screen width. All right, so we talked about this a tiny bit yesterday, but I'm a really big fan, especially when you're starting out, of follow the conventions. So stuff like logo in the upper left, logo and menu in the upper left, and like, you know, search bar and shopping cart in the upper right. Like that's just a typical, like just for e-commerce, like particularly, like that's a very typical e-commerce example. So, and like having your navigation sort of centered in the middle, like in the top. There are websites that like will decide that, you know, we think we're going to break the mold and we're going to have all of our navigation, like we're going to move our whole nav bar so that it's fixed on the bottom of the customer's, like on the user's screen, right? So that might be really great depending on the particular experience that you're looking for. But there's a whole principle in user experience called don't make me think, which is that like, in the same sense that how many of you, if you picked up a book, would probably put it in your left hand and let it drop open, right? Because the book spine is naturally left facing, right? And you know, like you aren't opening it with the spine right facing and expecting that to be the front of the book. Like you know that books, the spine goes on the left because you've used a book so many times, right? Like spine goes on the left and the pages flip with your right hand. And so that's a convention that you started learning when you were very, very small. It's actually totally different in like certain other contexts, right? So I think Israel, they read right to left, so it's actually flipped, right? So there's actual cultural context to some of that stuff, but the point is like you need to understand the cultural context that you're working inside of to know what people's norms are, because otherwise your interface that you're building comes across as totally not intuitive to the people that you're building it for. So if your customers are expecting, or you know, your users are expecting things to be in specific places, if you put them in different places, they're going to have trouble finding them. Like even if you make them super big, so they're like really high in the visual hierarchy, you're still risking people not finding stuff. There's a whole thing called like heat mapping where they actually track mouse movements. There's like data analytics software that tracks mouse movements of people using websites. And people almost always start in the upper left-hand corner. They might skim across if they're not finding what they're looking for, but they generally skim back and then they go down the page. So like, essentially you put all the most important things in the top left across, and then easily accessible from a visual standpoint from the left-hand side and over, because that's what most people do. So if you put something really important in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a good chance that a big portion of your users aren't going to see it. So that's just something to think about. Like, it feels like cheating when you're like looking at other people's websites and you're like, I'm going to just kind of follow the basic layout they have going on here. You're not cheating. You're just deciding not to open the book backwards, right? So it's just follow the conventions, because you want your stuff to be easy for other people to use. And so people are used to the conventions. Don't make them learn new conventions just to use your stuff.
So on that note, to keep with the norms, you mentioned that there was some type of platform called Card to make sure that the page width was adaptable. And in that graphic, I see that, you know, the mobile puts I guess that red bar at the top, which may be a navigational bar or whatever. And then everyone else has it on the left. So does the card help make your web page more adaptable for different devices?
We'll talk about a few of them in context when we see them. It's a way of breaking content down into these card-sized like chunks, because the card-sized chunks are like tiles. They're really easy to like shift around. Versus if you have a bigger chunk of content, you have to figure out what to do with it at a smaller size. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's sort of a so it's a thinking about it in terms of like breaking the layout down into a bunch of smaller pieces, so that you don't have to figure out how to make the stuff inside of the cards. Generally doesn't have to be super adaptable, because it's sort of already in its smallest possible form. That works for some layouts and doesn't work for other layouts. It's just, but that's like a common pattern, right? That sometimes it's something that people do to make it simpler to flex from one screen to another. There's a ton of other ways to do it. That's just one like pattern of doing it.
We got a request in the chat asking if we might be able to turn on the closed captions, but I'm not able to activate them.
Yeah, I just have to stop sharing in order to actually see all the, that's live transcript, right? Enable auto transcription. Sound correct, Dana?
Hold on, I just had the directions up. See if I can get back to them. So let's see.
I'm seeing assign someone to type copy an API token.
Oh, that would be for manual transcriptions though. We're looking for the automatic ones. So let's see, enable. So it says,
I'm seeing it now.
Oh, you do? Okay, great.
Yeah. Hopefully other people are seeing it as well.
I don't see anything on my screen. Oh, hold on. It says live transcript is available. Oh, I see it now. Okay. I just had to click on it.
Great. Sorry about that. I didn't even realize that was an option. I would have done that earlier. All right. Zoom, why do you keep jumping back to my wrong desktop? All right. So I've just created like a sort of, this is not an all-encompassing list, but sort of some best practices when it comes to page layout, besides some of the other ones I just kind of mentioned, is keeping a primary call to action per page. So if you're, something like a home page may have multiple places you can go with it, but if you're on like a landing page or a product page, you generally want to keep one primary call to action and stick with like one call to action like button in a view. So if you're gonna like scroll away from the call to action as you like move down the content, it's okay to like add one farther down, but you don't want essentially every call to action you have. So think about it in a sense of like, if you have a buy now button, if you have 6 buy now buttons, each of those buy now buttons is a lot less effective than if you just picked one and focused on it, right? And focused all your energy on getting the person looking at it to see that one buy now button. Carolyn, you had a question?
Yeah, I've been seeing websites, they're not necessarily call to action, but and it's actually quite annoying. But instead of having multiple buttons for that thing, the thing follows you as you go down the page. And I don't know if they're doing that anymore. And then on your way up, it's like, all right, your thoughts on if you were to have a call to action, do that.
Yeah, so if that's actually a really common e-commerce pattern, because especially on mobile, it's a challenge to have adequate product information that people can look at while also keeping the primary purpose of the page in view, which of course the primary purpose of any product page from a business perspective is to get you to add it to cart and like purchase the thing.
Yep.
So that's a super common thing to, yep. Caitlin mentioned that you do that at work. Yeah, actually I helped design that. So it's a super common thing to like have one that basically picks up as you scroll by the add to cart button. It like pops the most basic information at the top, which actually is related to something that's not on this slide, but is on one of the later slides, which is making sure that you're always orienting your user as much as possible. So keeping the basic product information, like the title of the product and the price and the add to cart button in front of them, is actually a useful thing. Like it's kind of a positive in the sense of like the customer at least knows where they are. So
kind of depends how you do it.
Those are not a bad thing. Yeah, you can.
You don't want to be obnoxious. I'm being followed.
Yeah, you can do it super obnoxiously.
Yes, I don't want to.
The balance of trying to figure out how to make it a little more friendly, like so that it feels more like a service than like a a little more like a service than like a tail, right? Someone who's following you around. But yeah, that's a good question. So
your golf caddy.
Yes.
Okay. So would you think that if one wanted to have your call to action button or whatever it is going to be, that doing that is okay then? It sounds like yes.
Yeah, I think it is. It's I would probably think about the larger context and decide whether or not it provides a service to, or it provides a service to the business or the people behind the application, right? If the answer to those questions is it provides a service to everybody, then like wholeheartedly go for it. If the answer to that question is, it provides a really useful service to the business or like the people behind that website or application, but it really doesn't provide any actual utility to the person using it,
right?
Then I'd say like you should think pretty hard about whether or not that's actually something you want to do, because when that is the balance of how you're like, who's getting the value out of this particular feature, often that means that you're really building something that's probably not actually that helpful for your users.
And if you help the users, the customers, the visitors, you're actually helping everybody.
Yeah, it's always a balance in terms of there are sometimes things that because of business needs or because of, there are sometimes reasons that you have to be a little less helpful than you might want to be that are like valid, but it's always just kind of weighing those two things, understanding that you might be a little bit less helpful than you could be in a particular scenario, but deciding it's a cost benefit analysis, right? Like there are certain times that it's worth it, basically.
Minimum viable help the userage.
Yes.
Thank you.
We have one question in the chat that I can see. We may have a couple more. Latanya wants to know if code can be added to transition a dev website, and I'm assuming this would go for any website. Could code be added to transition a website to a responsive site?
Absolutely. So like you will run into more struggle with that if it's laid out in such a way that it doesn't easily flex. So I'll say it this way: if you like most layouts can be like adjusted so they can be flexible, but if you have like all of your content at a completely static width, and you've designed all of the stuff that's inside of it, assuming that it's always at that particular width, it's going to be harder than if you set stuff up to be a little bit more fluid. So basically it's a matter of, it's always doable. It just has to do with how much code you have to rewrite essentially. Because it's stuff like keeping everything in static pixels versus using percentages or like Flexbox or things like that are like going to automatically give you a certain amount of flexibility to like the widths on your content and things like that. If you have everything set in static pixels, you're going to have to go and rewrite all those widths because they're set at a totally static size. And you just have to overwrite that stuff and make it more flexible, but it's doable. So.
And then Karen had a question. Let me know if you've already answered this. She said, when you're on a lot of mobile apps, they give you an option to view in desktop mode. Is this the same thing?
So that option essentially is a way of saying you're forcing the styling to be the same as it would be on desktop on a mobile device. So you're essentially saying like companies that have those often are saying like the mobile experience is sort of experience light, right? Like you're missing potential things that might be on the like desktop application. And they want to give you access to all of that stuff. But they're saying like, hey, we can give you access to all the stuff that's on the desktop application, but just so you know, the experience is going to be significantly subpar because it's all going to be itty bitty and you're going to have to like scroll in and pinch and zoom and all that kind of fun stuff. So it is something that people do, but as a general rule, you're better off designing your content and your layout in a way that you can get all of the actual core functionality that people need present and accountable for on their phone. Yeah, if Carolyn just chimed in and said that sometimes she prefers a desktop view on her phone. It totally depends, but like probably if the mobile layout is not helpful enough that it's that the desktop layout on your mobile device is better, that's actually probably a design problem, right? That they're not doing a good job actually solutioning for mobile because it's much harder for you to use. Mm-hmm. So, and that's part of the problem that like mobile first design is trying to solve, is making the premier solution for the smallest screens so that you don't need that kind of out essentially for people.
Well, you guys are right, like in the middle of my concept for my capstone, where I was trying to help students who are having difficulty in 8th grade with 2 math concepts that we had to review over and over in the classroom. And I was envisioning that there be think clouds for each step to get to the solution. Are those separate calls of actions for that one page? And does an app kind of resolve, if I design an app for it, will it resolve all this formatting tweaks, that stuff?
Well, if it's a mobile specific application, so it's not actually accessible on desktop, then yes, you would be designing just for mobile. And so that you basically just have to solve the problem once. You still have the issue of like what size of mobile device people are accessing the content on. But it depends, right? Are you specifically wanting this to only be available on mobile devices, or is it something that you want to also be available for people accessing it on a tablet or on a desktop? Mm. So like in a larger context. So I guess my highly concrete answer for you is it depends.
Okay.
So another really important piece of like page layout and just sort of like usability for things, especially, actually this is true across devices, frankly, is that when you have multiple, like a user needs to take multiple steps, you need to very loudly and clearly tell them where they are in the process and like what step they're on and give them a way to move backwards if they need to. Because there's nothing more aggravating than starting a multi-step process, having no idea how many steps there are, and having no idea how to get out of the process if you need to. Just one of those things. It's like walking somebody into a dead end, right? Mm-hmm. And then this is related, but making it easy for users to locate themselves within your site. So this comes to like simple stuff that you guys probably take for granted because it's like ubiquitous, but stuff like highlighting the page in the navigation that you're on. So like if you're on the about page is like has some kind of styling, right? That's contrasting to the other navigation links. So you know that you're on the about page. Or like yesterday, we kind of talked a little bit about like when you hovered over a particular category of product on Wayfair, like the card there was like an outline on it. That's another way of sort of like helping the user locate what their mouse is focused on, right? Websites often have a lot of stuff. Honestly, websites, applications, all of them have a lot of stuff going on a lot of the time. And so it's easy for people to get lost. So the better you can do about sort of helping people understand where they are, the less likely they will be to get frustrated and lost and leave. All right, so some mobile specific best practices. How many people have fat fingered something on a device? This is literally me raising my hand. Like you tried to click on something and you click on something next to it, or like
yeah. Or texting, I always send things.
Yeah. So there's the best thing you can do to try and help that not happen. It will still happen because we're clumsy. It's a human thing. But the best thing that you can do is always keep anything that needs a touch point on mobile to be at least 45 pixels by 45 pixels. That's like actually, if you actually pull up like a 45 by 45 pixel square, it's actually pretty small for your thumb, and I have small hands. So so it's doing that, and then also making sure that you have like 25 to 30 pixels of space between touch points so that people can actually, like, you don't want to make it so somebody, in order to touch the right thing, has to like hold their phone and like, I got it, right? Like you want it to be like, I just tap and we're good. I can keep going. So giving people adequate space around the things they're supposed to be able to tap on and making sure that those tap areas are large enough, right? So that they can easily tap them without smushing 6 things next to them. Another thing to note, and this is obviously not a universal truth, but a large majority of people are right-handed and navigate their cell phones holding their phone and navigate with their thumb. This is not universal, but it is a large majority of people. So you want to make sure that things that like you want people to be able to click on are actually pretty easily accessible with a thumb extension. So this actually kind of goes against the whole like have your menu in the upper left hand corner on mobile, right? Like it's pretty common to keep your menu right here on mobile applications, in large part because that's where we keep it on desktop applications. So there are certain like mobile apps and things like that that have moved over to having icons like, or having menus and things like that down in the lower right. It really depends, right? Because having it down in the lower right makes it easily accessible for anybody that wants to tap on it, but it also can get in the way from when people are scrolling and things like that. So it's kind of one of those, look at your context. It's okay to have things farther away that you have to reach for. It just makes sure that like your add to cart button, for example, are most commonly right aligned on mobile because people can scroll and tap, just as an example. Also, another thing to note, and this is one of those, like, you kind of have to balance it. Icons are super useful on mobile because they're really small, like they take up not a lot of space versus like words. However, icons are highly contextual, and what I think an icon looks like and what you think an icon looks like and what it actually means might be completely different. And so it's important to kind of like be careful with your use of icons, I will say. So there are things that are pretty universal at this point, like the 3 lines meaning a menu, pretty universal. If you're dealing with a customer base or a user base that is like really technology, like poorly versed in technology. So like if you're dealing with like an elderly population who may not be as familiar with technology, you actually might be better off going with a button that says menu and taking up more space to make sure that they can actually use that thing. So this is about knowing who your user is, right? So, but if you're dealing with somebody who's on a phone 10 hours a day, like they're gonna know what like the 3 bars are, and you can just use it and be fine. But it's being careful about those kinds of icons, because sometimes people use icons in ways that are like they want to just use icons for everything. And it's actually something we talked about a little bit when we were trying to decide how to teach you guys Git, is that one of the problems with like Git in VS Code is that it's very icon heavy, which is great once you know what the features of Git are. But very problematic when you don't know what the features are and you're like, what does this symbol mean? It's got squiggly lines. Why does it have squiggly lines? So it's just the icons are contextual. If the context is obvious to most of your users, then go for it. But if it's not, then sometimes you got to be a little creative and think of some other options. And this is another one that is important. This last bullet point is if you
You just cut out, Christy? There was music and then you cut out?
Yep. Sorry.
Okay.
I think Dana was helping out by muting everybody, but then I got muted too. So if you have content that you like absolutely have to have the user see, don't collapse it. So like don't put it in an accordion where it gets like squished. It may make it efficient in terms of like people scrolling through the page and make it shorter on mobile. And so it's always really tempting to do that. But if it's like really, really important, there's always the possibility that people won't think to click on that and won't see the content. So you're better off figuring out a way to show people the things that are most important and deal with the page being a little bit longer and a little bit like, more scroll heavy to navigate.
Christy, I apologize. I didn't mean to mute you. I heard music and was just trying to mute everyone. That was my first time doing it. I actually didn't know whether or not it would mute the host. So now I know.
It's all good.
Okay.
I noticed, luckily Zoom let me know that I was muted. So I didn't
Okay.
actually stop talking.
Okay,
But
great.
you guys couldn't tell because I was muted. So, all right. So large screens. So we just talked about tiny screens. The middle screens tend to sort of take care of themselves. I mean, there are like things to know about them, but we're going to talk about them a little bit as we look at some like real sites. Large screens. So a lot of you guys are working on laptop screens. So something to be aware of when it comes to like, if your users might be using an extra large monitor, is you want to make sure that your page width, the general rule of thumb is somewhere around 1400 to 1600 pixels, is don't let your page width expand past that point, because that point is actually 1400 to 1600 pixels is approximately the width of like somewhere it's in the like 8 to 11 inches range for most screens, which yes, that coincides with the size of like a letter sheet of paper. There's a reason for that. So actually, when you have super long lines of like, or like really wide content, users actually get screen fatigue a lot more easily, because we subconsciously do this while we're looking at content. You're currently making your users have a neck workout that they didn't sign up for, which may or may not be something A, they're capable of doing, and B, it's just another way to make people tired, essentially. So making sure that you cap your content at a width that's reasonable, that most people can see by just moving their eyes back and forth, or even not having to move their eyes that far back and forth. You'll notice that some websites, I'm thinking like medium.com, for example, actually caps their content on a really wide screen at like 1100 pixels. Like, it's pretty narrow. But the reason for that is because if it's straight text, you don't really want to go a lot wider than that, because it is that sort of, even having to move your eyes all the way from one edge of your vision all the way to the other is it's exhausting. So basically, this is a don't give your users neck or eye strain rule. So you want to cap your content and plan for it to not be like super wide. If you're doing something where you're showing off a bunch of big, beautiful images, in that case, it can be totally fine to let things flow full screen, because you're just letting your big, beautiful images be a little bit bigger and more beautiful, right? So like, it really depends on your content and what you're building. Just because your content, like I'm talking images and text and like video and things like that to sort of be centrally located, just because your content doesn't go full screen doesn't mean that like your background color has to stop, right? So your background color can go full screen, can make your website feel full width, right? It feels like it's taking up the whole screen. And most people won't even notice, right, that there isn't actually like real content all the way across. So it's just a strategy for making it feel modern in the sense that it takes up the whole screen, but being kind to people in the sense that you're not making them like move a whole bunch. And it's kind of thinking through the like ergonomics of the users that are like looking at your stuff. We kind of talked about this already, but visual hierarchy becomes extra important on large screens because you have a lot of space. So it's easy to be like, hey, we don't need to make things any bigger than they are on mobile. We'll just show 4 times as much. Woohoo! Right? So anybody that's been on a site like that, that's similar to, I mentioned that grocery store effect, right? When you're looking at the shelf with like the millions of small things and you just simply cannot find what you're looking for. It's actually called like link blindness, or like essentially it's the blindness that you get when there's like too many small things and you're trying to differentiate between them and you just can't because there's too many things. So you just like stop seeing the individual things. Yes, similar to I Spy, except I Spy is not what you want to be having happen when the goal is to be able to help visually direct people where they want to go. So making sure you're prioritizing the most important things, essentially. And the other thing to remember is that when it comes to mobile devices and large screens, that you actually get to do something that's kind of helpful, which is that you can make text slightly smaller on mobile. I'm not talking like 6-point font here. I'm talking like, 12 is acceptable. On desktop, the minimum is normally somewhere around, the minimum for like basic body copy is about 16 pixels. So it's normally in that like 16 to 18 range, because I would guess that all of you that are on a laptop are sitting with your face at least 2 to 3 feet away from your laptop screen, right? And so having the text be larger is a good thing because your eyes are literally farther away from the text. Whereas most of us sit with our phones a similar distance that we would have like a book. So it's okay to use similar type sizes, right? As like a book, right? They tend to be somewhere in the length of your arm away from your face at an angle. You guys probably can't see me very well, but I'm, here range. So So they're closer. So it's okay to have the type be smaller because they're closer. It's also a lot easier to zoom in and out on mobile, which you don't want to make it so that people have to zoom in to look at your content, which is why I'm saying like don't dive down into the 6 to 8 point font where it's like itty bitty for most typefaces, but it's okay to shrink it just a little bit so that it's better for the context. Because if you don't change stuff, it often feels like large on mobile too. Like you can look at something and if it doesn't change size, it kind of like huh, why is the font all of a sudden like kind of cartoonishly large? Because it didn't adjust. All right, so before we get to the next part of our regularly scheduled program, design systems and styling frameworks, we're going to play a little bit and look at some responsive page layout in the wild. Yes, we're coming back to Wayfair largely because we looked at it yesterday and I figured you guys are all familiar with it now. And it gives us a chance to talk about page layout without having to talk about content as much. That being said, I did line up some other websites that we didn't spend as much time talking about yesterday. So I am not doing an unpaid advertisement for Wayfair, I promise. This is not, I'm not endorsing or saying they're a bad company in any way. I am neutral on the topic of Wayfair, but yeah. All right, so when it comes to like playing with responsive screen sizes in your browser, when you are on a laptop, my personal opinion is you are much better off having having your elements, your dev tools be at the bottom of your screen because it lets you mess with screen width a lot better. If you're on a bigger screen, you can put your dev tools wherever the heck you want because it doesn't really matter. But laptops tend to be, depending on the size of your laptop, they're borderline on whether or not you can actually get to the maximum screen width that that website's designed for. So it just depends. If you're on if you have an external monitor that's 27 plus inches, you're gonna have no trouble getting to the max width that most websites do. But as you
have
can see,
a question.
Yep.
If your dev tools come up on the right or left side of your screen, how do you adjust it so that they come up on the bottom?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's either settings or those dots. It's the dots. I generally adjust these like once a week, if that, and then I never do. So it's the dots. So you click on these little dots and you have dock side. You can undock it so it's in a completely separate window. I actually might be tempted to do that if I was, well, if I didn't have a second monitor, that I wouldn't do that as much. But with a second monitor, if I was fully playing with stuff and I didn't want it to be, if I wanted it to be on my laptop, sometimes I do that so that I can actually have my dev tools like on my second monitor so I can see them both really easily. But you can do left aligned, you can do right aligned. But see, right aligned makes it so that you kind of max out width-wise a lot more. And then you can do bottom aligned.
So
Which
question, if you open it in a different window, will it still communicate with the page? I mean,
Yep.
it's just the view that's changed, but they're still connected in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Okay.
actually another thing that is, it can be, if you're a many tab user like me, having your dev tools opened in a separate window can be confusing because I often will have multiple tabs open with dev tools open for each of them. And when they're open in separate windows, then it becomes a second set of windows that I have to figure out if I'm in the right dev tools for the right tab that I have open, which is just falls into a category of thinking that I just prefer to skip altogether because it's aggravating. So,
But if I'm just using inspect, for example, and I'm inspecting a page,
Yep.
and I have inspect in it and in its own window,
Yep.
they do still communicate. Okay, that's good.
yes.
All right.
Yeah, and they still
Thanks.
communicate even when you have multiple doc separate windows open and multiple like tabs that are associated with. It's just easier to like accidentally be like interacting with the wrong dev tools for the page you're on. So it's, yeah, anyways. That's a personal preference thing. It's one of those things like figure out what works for you, try different options, do what you like. Some people, I switch around depending on what I'm doing too, because personally from like an adjusting styling standpoint, I find this view super annoying because I can see approximately like a style and a half in here. Whereas if it's on the right-hand side, I can move this up and like adjusting so that I can see my style panel much more effectively. So it just depends on what you're, feel free to optimize your dev tool placement based off of your current task. It's not like it's hard to change. So, all right. So we talked a little bit yesterday about this fun little arrow element that lets you like hover over things and bring them up in the code, right? The icon next to it is actually the toggle device toolbar, which I think you guys kind of briefly touched on at some point or another. So this is handy for a couple of reasons. One, it opens the, what you can call the technical term, it's not, I don't know if it's a technical term, I call it the device spoofer. So it's Chrome essentially pretending to be a Pixel 2 or an iPhone X. So these aren't perfect because pixel densities on the different devices are a little bit different. You can actually also customize this list. If you go down to edit, you can like update it with different options. For our purposes, the defaults are fine. But it also has this generic responsive option. So the advantage of this is there's these little lines over here. You can actually adjust your page width and it adjusts the page size for you. This is essentially equivalent to taking your window and going like this. The main advantage of it for what we're trying to do is that it tells you how wide the screen is. So that's actually super helpful because actually one of the things that you guys are going to be doing for your homework assignment is finding breakpoints. So we're going to talk a little bit about breakpoints. Which actually, I thought I had a slide on breakpoints. This is an interesting question. I wonder if that didn't update. Ha! I did have a slide on breakpoints. I had a slide disappear. Sorry about that. So breakpoints. We talked a little bit about media queries earlier. This is a pretty standard setup for what a media query would look like. Following this, the closing bracket would actually be an opening curly brace, and then you would put all your CSS rules inside of it. But so this is sort of my rules of thumb for identifying breakpoints on another website or on your own stuff. So often what you would do is when you're starting with a functional layout, you would actually start with your mobile. So build out your mobile version, get all your styling kind of approximately where you want it to be, and then come into the correct. Oh, that's what happened. I'm in present mode. Come into the correct tab on the browser. So come in here, start at, I'm going to just shortcut this. Start at 320. See how your design is doing. And then start shifting your content out. So like, all right, I'm at 376, still looks pretty good. All right, things are still going okay. 480, all right, we're still all right. And then if you don't have additional styling built in to help things flex, you're basically going to get to a point where your design breaks, right? Where it stops looking like it's supposed to look and it starts looking broken. That's why they're called breakpoints. So it's the point where, literally, it's the point where stuff breaks. So what you can do is then, so the reason it's nice to do this in responsive mode is you know exactly around how many pixels that's at. You can actually then go into your code, you can set up another media query, and you can make your styling adjustments for, you know, at media, screen, min width, whatever the point is that it breaks. Normally you pick like, yeah, you pick that point where it breaks. You say, okay, this is the spot, right? And then you can make your styling adjustments so that it actually looks the way that it should. And then you keep expanding until it breaks again. Like I said earlier, in the same way that there are sort of standard lists of like common device widths for screen sizes, there are also common like lists of common breakpoints that people use. So like, I didn't actually write this down in the slides anywhere, but it's pretty common, like I said, to start with 320 pixels as like a minimum sort of mobile size to start with like designing, and then to adjust to tablet around 768. Some people adjust at 667, which is actually like a common size for phones that are like landscape. It depends on what your content is like. But so in that 667, 768 range is sort of common. I just know these because I've been doing this a long time, but it's not something you need to memorize. The lists exist. And frankly, you can always use those benchmarks to kind of start your ballpark media query. And then you can actually just go through, slowly expand stuff. And if things break sooner, I will pull up a solid one and like a solid list. Sorry, I'm responding to Melikron's question. So we're gonna, I will pull up a solid breakpoint list for you guys and post it in Slack after class. Or Dana just pulled one up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Too.
Yes. I had found a really good one at the W3 school.
But yeah, so it's just like breakpoints are just part of responsive design, because the reality is that any layout you do is only going to be able to flex so effectively within a range. So you're setting up ranges for it to flex, and then you're making adjustments accordingly. So if you notice, we just went through a Wayfair breakpoint, right? So if I get a little bit narrower, see how my content is sort of set up like it would be for a mobile device? You know, everything's kind of like all in one column. Like they have stuff you can slide back and forth in, but this is a sort of assuming that you're scrolling down a particular column. They have these smaller, basically button-sized things for department. These probably actually go even smaller. Yep, if you're even smaller, they go a little bit smaller. Flex makes that kind of, this is kind of like what I was talking about in terms of cards, Corey, because you have these cards, and so it's easy for them to sort of, they're like, oh, well, we're going to do two. Once we get to like sort of a max size for the cards, we'll switch over and do four cards right next to each other.
So in my world, that's like when I used to design PowerPoints and make the text box, and but these are adaptable based on the size of the page of the website page. Right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Got it. Mm-hmm. So
yeah,
like
this is
text boxes.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, I mean, they're basically little boxes of content that essentially have rules. It's like the person who's designed them has figured out like the minimum width for these cards, right? These little boxes is 200 pixels. So At anything less, well, it's not 200 pixels because I'm not at 800 yet, but like, so at anything less than 730, 750-ish, we're only going to show 2 because they look good at this width, but they can't be any narrower than this. So like, I'd rather show them all next to each other, but because they're wide, I can't. Does that make sense? Like, they have to be a minimum amount of width. I can't.
So this setup that Wayfair did was ideal for multiple devices, and then it's adjustable. And you know, and I guess on their app it would be moving around just like these cards are in the if there's a mobile app equivalent to this, right?
Yep.
So
yeah. So, oh, go ahead.
So what they did was they created their page, and then they added those cards for the images and content that they wanted, and set the minimum and maximum parameters for the card or the web page.
Yeah.
Okay.
So so and Flex makes this, like, Flexbox makes this type of layout much easier to actually code out. It used to be that, like, before Flexbox existed, you would have to essentially go through and say, like, okay, at which point do I want to, like, change the styling from being a 2-column layout to being a 4-column layout. With Flexbox, you can actually set a minimum width on the children and essentially set them all to be like a flex of 1. But because there's a minimum width on the children, like, when they're this small, the flex rules are automatically like, having 4 of them next to each other would definitely be way too skinny. So it forces them onto 2 rows automatically. Whereas it used to be you would have to, like, actually code out, like, the 2-column layout and then the 4-column layout, and then, like, so it's actually, this is a very useful feature. So
we have a question in the chat. Latonia wants to know, is the picture tag a card?
So because we were talking about picture tags yesterday with, like, the images. So no, not explicitly. So let's actually really quickly, sorry, apologies, my voice is apparently having struggles again. You can actually double up on your tools here. So you can use your little inspector arrow while also having your responsive stuff on, which is nice. Assuming that I can manage to do this. Okay, so we have, so that I just actually hovered specifically over the image. So I'm going to keep going up until I find the whole card. We have cardlet, we have close. All right, and we have grid item is probably closer to what I'm looking for. So what they've actually done is they've actually got, like, a div here that's wrapping this whole card, the whole content. You guys will get into the principle of components. I kind of referenced it a little bit when I was talking about InVision and the sort of, like, ability to make that InVision Studio thing, and, like, the ability to make symbols that you can repeat all over the place yesterday. But when you guys get into React, you're going to talk a lot more about components, because React and most, frankly, JavaScript frameworks use components. So every web page you're looking at, so you guys have been, like, you statically coded out, like, the HTML wireframes, right? With all the different pieces on the page. Well, things like, just as an example, the header and the footer on those pages generally repeat across every single page layout, right? So instead of hard coding those for every single InVision Studio and InVision Desktop are the same thing, and they are free. Just to answer Carolyn's question real quick. So instead of coding out a header and a footer, like repeating it over and over again for every single page that you have, you would actually turn your header into a component, right? So you would build out the code just for your header in a separate HTML file. And then on your actual main page template, you would say, I would like to pull in my header file, and it'll drop the code for that header component onto the HTML file. So you're essentially, what you're doing is, instead of you having to manually go through and build out each piece over and over and over again, you're telling the computer, hey, I have this piece that's going to get reused all the time. I want you to compile the page for me on the fly. So you're gonna learn how to do this in React, but frankly, every single, I'm like just trying to make sure I can't think of one that doesn't do this. Every single website building application that exists. So I'm talking everything from like WordPress to Vue to React to Angular to like all the JavaScript frameworks, like anything that, like, even like the ones that have lots of places for customers and like users, like non-technical users, to like add content and things like that, they all use this concept. That's their components. You can also hear them called template partials. So it's like essentially what it is it's a part of a page that you know you're going to reuse a whole bunch of times. So you set it up in a framework in a way that it can be reused, essentially. You'll see it everywhere. Sorry, go ahead, Dana.
I was going to say, Mel had a question. Should we organize all of our code in this way? And then I wanted to know if you were going to give them a break tonight, because it's almost 7:15.
Oh my goodness, how did it get so late? Sorry. Yes, I am giving you a break.
You're a taskmaster.
Sorry, I got talking and I forgot what was going on. So yes, once you understand, like once you guys get to React, they'll actually talk a bunch more about how to organize your code in sort of componentized ways. And you'll get more introduced to how to like organize your code in a sort of separate, split out way without using a program of some sort that compiles your code for you. Doing template partials and things like that, where you're like pulling things into other HTML files. It's not something like HTML does out of the box. So I would say, yes, you will want to organize things this way eventually. Wait until you get to React. Because it's just and every like program that compiles code this way has slightly different ways of organizing stuff, but it really is the same. Like, I want you guys to understand, like, it's the same umbrella concept everywhere. Once you learn how to code websites in ways that like let you reuse pieces that get reused everywhere, you'll never want to go back to hard coding them the static way, because it feels incredibly tedious.
Is the program React a free program?
Yes. Yeah, React is it is open sourced by, it's not Google because that's Angular. Facebook. So yeah, it's anyways. So yeah, you'll get used to organizing things in that way, and it's like a mind shift to get there, and then once you're used to it, it's really hard to go back the other way. Super quick, 2 things before we take a break. 1, I'm introducing the term to you guys of dry, whether, I don't know, Max has said this to you already or not, but where you say do not repeat yourself. That's the basic concept behind templatizing things in components, is that when something gets reused all over the place, having it centrally located in one place and then pulled in other places means that if you need to update it, you don't have to update it in 100 places, you update it in one, which is super valuable. Second thing, I mostly just wanted you to see really quickly how things adjust across breakpoints. Because we're going to talk, so that was a breakpoint. When things are kind of flexing a little bit, it's not a breakpoint. When there's like a big jump in how the content is, that's a breakpoint. So like right now, as an example, we're still actually, yeah, so this is a mobile, like this is Wayfair's mobile navigation bar, right? And then the navigation bars are often like an easy way to see like very clearly. And see, we're actually, what I was talking about, we're in that 768 range, which is often where small tablets start. And so when things start to shift a little bit more towards desktop. But so
I've
then,
noticed on particularly this MacBook with a 13-inch monitor, I usually have like a 15-inch on my Toshiba. And I have to, I had the resolution turned up and everything, so I had to kind of fix that. But if I am kind of blowing up a page or whatever, there's a point, or let's say I'm trying to zoom in on your slides, let's say, and make them a little bigger. It does weird stuff. It'll start to respond, but then it looks small for a while, and then it gets big for a while, and then sometimes it keeps almost like it's zooming out when I'm zooming in. So it's the similar kind of thing. And I know I killed all the accessibility settings and stuff that maybe I had turned on. But it's that kind of a weirdness. It's like, would that also be a break point where it kind of goes in the opposite direction you expect, or it,
Yeah, so it's that opposite piece is probably in part because we have media queries going on, right, that are often used based off of device size, like screen width. And when you have the zoom setting different than 100%, sometimes it messes with the browser's ability to tell exactly what your actual screen width is.
Yeah, it's
so
so
it's that kind of stuff. I was trying to see if I could find you.
In YouTube also, that'll happen. Like if I really want to see our presentation, I want to see the material, like your class. And it will do this weird, there must be a Google thing maybe, where, if you say 100%, sometimes 100% is bigger than where you had it, but where you had it was a bigger number. I don't want to take time out of class for this, but I just was curious about it, if that kind of related or if that's something else altogether, and I just don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's how media queries and things interact with Zoom is like, it's complicated and sort of like weird. So I don't have a super great answer for you, but it's just I guess the short answer is it's complicated and it's sort of its own weird rabbit hole.
So it's not an actual break point then, it's a breaking point.
Yeah, exactly. And it's probably an edge case. It's probably an edge case that they're not designing for in a super intentional.
Well, somebody
kind of
like me,
way.
I'm very,
And so it's just but it depends, right? If you're working with people who are often going to be zoomed in, then yes, makes total sense. I just really quickly want to show you. This is how often media queries will show up inside of your styles. So this is inheriting from HTML. There's a font size that's getting set to 16 pixels at a minimum width of 640 pixels for the screen. Just as an example.
Why is it struck out? The strike through.
Oh, it's struck out because this is I'm on this card div, so it's probably got a different font size. Yeah, it's got a different font size set someplace else. So it strikes them out in the browser because it's showing the style tab shows you all of the rules that apply to that particular element, but the crossed out ones are the ones that have been cascaded over. So they've been overwritten by ones that are down the line. So if I uncheck this to unapply it, I would have said that would apply, but apparently I wasn't as far down as I thought I was. This is why it's easier to look at this in much. Oh, okay, here. So we have font size attached to something much lower. So then ones that were potentially crossed out are now uncrossed because you're basically moving up the rules in which one gets applied when you unapply them like that. But the crossed out basically just says, this one's been overwritten. it's super useful to understand that though, because if you're looking at your rule that you wrote, expecting it to be applied, and then you pull it up in your browser and it's crossed out, it's useful to know that like, oh, this is being overwritten by something.
Yeah.
And it's
Is it the
also,
browser that's override? I can't, I know we talked about this with Max and everything with the CSS or.
no, so basically it's, so CSS, CSS basically applies rules in order of specificity. And it defines specificity starting with the basic order of those rules. So rules that are applied first are generally considered less specific than like the last one in the line. And actually the browser organized them in reverse. So the most specific ones show up on top and the least specific ones show up on the bottom in here. And so that's the cascade rule, is it's like you have the least specific ones and then they like cascade down to the next one, but the like most recent one is always the one that's like that takes over.
So it's about 7:22.
Yep.
Okay.
right.
What time did you want them to come back?
Let's see. So 7:22. We were doing like 10 to 15 minutes. So why don't we do 7:35 work for you guys? So we have enough time to cover design systems and stuff.
Yeah.
All right. I'll see y'all at 7:35.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for making me stop talking, Dana.
No problem. No problem. You and Carolyn were on a roll. See, I see some people already stepped away. I guess they really needed to take the break.
Yeah, it's fair.
Yeah, that's okay.
Which actually, I will be right back as well. Yeah, Latanya, I saw your question in the chat. Yeah, I can, let me share my screen again real quick and I'll just show you that while people are trickling back in.
Okay, I was just curious, like if you had a very specific thing, I ended up like typing in what you had grid, whatever, and it took me where you were. But.
Yeah, so you can like doing find in the inspector is a totally valid way of finding stuff. But if you're, so like, and I'll actually do that a lot, especially if I have a particular class that I've added in my code and I want to find it, I'll look it up in the inspector in the elements tab by doing, because you can, as you probably figured out, when you're in elements, if you hit Command F, it actually brings up a find inside of inspector piece. But if you, which I now can't X out of because of Zoom, but you can also, if you're trying to find stuff within the code from the page, the selector arrow is like definitely your friend, because it makes it really easy to find like a visual element within your actual code. Because like if I click on this, it automatically drops me down to the image, the code for this image. So that can make it really easy to find stuff quickly. And actually, if I'm editing stuff, I think Caitlin mentioned this the other day, but you can like, I'll often like click on something and then I'll look at the classes and then I'll actually do a project search for the classes within the project I'm working on. So here, let me pull up VS Code really quickly so I can show you what that looks like. So let's just say this has a class picture image on it. So if I had access to the source code for this and I could pull it up in VS Code. Let me snag VS Code. This is, you guys are getting a sneak preview of a demo we're gonna do in a sec. This little search icon here actually lets you search in your whole project folder for stuff. So I could either do .picture image if I'm looking specifically for the styling attached to that. So I would be looking for like the CSS stuff, or I could just do picture image if I want to see where it is like inside the HTML. And you can actually make this case sensitive or not, stuff like that. It's, when you're working on small projects, it's not as useful. When you're working on a code base that has hundreds of files in it, it's incredibly useful because it's just like, it can be really difficult to find things. And I actually use this feature a ton when I'm brand new on a project and I'm trying to just like learn my way around the code base, because it makes it, I can often, you know, I can find a piece that I can relate to, like a CSS class or a particular element. And then it makes it like, I can say, okay, this particular, like this carousel, like if I wanted to find this carousel in the code base, I would highlight this, find the, let me scroll over so this is not quite so tiny. All right, this is not going to make it that easy for me to find the, this is why I don't like looking at this in like super tiny. I prefer this vertically because it's a lot easier to find stuff. So anyway, so like if there was like a particular style, like not necessarily a style width, but like a particular class attached to this image because it was a carousel image, then I could go search for that class in the project. And that might be able to make it so that I can easily find the component that's attached to this particular carousel, which is just useful when I'm trying to like figure out the lay of the project, right? In terms of where things are organized. I can be like, oh, this is a carousel component, this lives here. And then if I do that enough times, I can like kind of see how things are associated to each other more easily. I learned that on my first job because the first job I ever had was working on a I was a front-end developer on an e-commerce website that had been in existence for probably easily 6 to 7 years, which sounds like, oh, that's not that long. But when you have a lot of different developers working on a project, people generate a lot of code really quickly. And we had like thousands of lines of CSS, just CSS. So like finding stuff was hard. And so being able to search was so helpful in just kind of trying to figure out where everything was. All right. Let me see. So I know a bunch of people don't have their cameras on, but I want to make, which is fine. I just want to make sure that everybody's back. If you're back, can I have a thumbs up or something? All right, looks like we got most people. I just want to have enough time to cover all this stuff, but also not leave everybody behind. So, all right. In reference to very large projects, we're going to talk about design systems and styling frameworks. Design systems and styling frameworks are useful for small projects too, but where they really shine is in large projects and providing a structure for a bunch of different people to work together in a way that stops the code from being super, super bloated. So what I mean by bloated is like that first job I was talking about, we used to regularly have problems with, it used to be the Internet Explorer. So Internet Explorer, it's really nice that it's not a thing anymore because it was terrible to support. But Internet Explorer actually had a thing where like they cut you off at like 13,000 lines of CSS. They stopped adding CSS. And there was so much CSS on that particular website that we would often do projects where if you added a significant amount of CSS when you created a new feature, it would spontaneously drop. It would like basically push a certain number of lines past the cutoff point. And so it would cause random styling errors because you'd basically be like accidentally pushing other code out the door for Internet Explorer specifically. So a solid design system or styling framework stops stuff like that from happening. Because there's nothing worse than like, hey, I tested my feature, it works correctly. Can we add it to the code base? Only to find out that like, yeah, except there's a whole bunch of stuff you didn't test that is now broken solely because you added some more lines of code to the project. But you don't have a good way of knowing what's actually going to break. Oh, you guys are asking about how to find stuff? Here, let me jump back to VS Code here real quick. So this is the little search icon in VS Code is how you search in projects. Command P actually lets you open specific files. This project I have open is only like 3 files, so there's not actually like a lot of information here, but it lets you can like find and replace. There's a bunch of stuff you can do, but Command P is the command palette inside of VS Code. All right, we'll be jumping back to VS Code here in just a second. So design systems and styling frameworks, super useful. I mostly just want you guys to know that they exist. You're actually going to be using one because Bootstrap is a styling framework, but I want you to understand sort of the broader context of them so that when you're out in the world, when you run into one, you're like, what is happening? You'll have an idea. Something we have to talk about in relation to design systems and styling frameworks, because they generally could not exist without CSS, what is called CSS preprocessors. There used to be more CSS preprocessors in the world. They still exist, but the it's kind of like there's a lot of other types of version control, but most people use Git at this point. There are other types of CSS preprocessors, but most people use Sass at this point. Sass was actually started as it means syntactically awesome style sheets. So plain CSS has two problems. Using solid naming conventions in your CSS for classes and things like that can get really verbose and therefore really annoying to code. And it's really difficult to maintain like consistent ways of using classes across a large group of people. If you think that you have like, it's hard to do it by yourself. And then if you add like 4 other people writing like a lot of CSS into the project, it gets very crazy very quickly. And there's also this thing with CSS where you actually duplicate a lot of the same code. So things like your primary color, the hex code or the color code for your primary color, because it's your primary color, probably gets used all over the place, which is great until somebody decides that you need to change the primary color on your website because they decide to change the brand colors. And then you have to go and find it in every single place that it's used and replace it and test it. So enter CSS preprocessors. They basically add some fundamental programming elements into CSS. So things like you can use variables instead of just like, so instead of that, like using your primary color, the like color code for it everywhere, you could actually set a variable called primary color and add your color code as the value and then use that variable anywhere. And all of a sudden that idea of updating your primary color goes from changing like 150 lines of code to changing 1 line of code, which is just like very helpful from a maintainability standpoint. But it also is good from a consistency standpoint because it means that you don't have developers that are just like, oh, I can't remember exactly what the primary color code value is. I'm gonna just go like use the eyedropper on one of the buttons and and that'll get me close enough. And then they copy that, and all of a sudden now you don't only have like one primary color, you have about 20 different versions of your primary color that are like really close to each other, but not quite. I promise you, I've actually worked on a website that this was like a legit problem. We were getting ready for a redesign, and one of my colleagues did an audit of the site and found 20 different versions of buttons that were being used that were all supposed to be primary buttons. So it's a real problem at scale and over time. Also, that Sass lets you nest your CSS rules. It lets you nest your styling rules so that they match the nesting that happens in your HTML, which is really useful from like a debugging standpoint. So really quickly, I'm going to just show you an incredibly basic example of Sass and how this works. So on your left, we have styles.scss. So that S in front of the CSS means that it's a Sass file. You could also do .sass. Most commonly, you see them as .scss at this point. I'm not actually sure the exact reason, but so this is actually, I just pulled a tiny code snippet of another thing I was working on. So this is kind of a random set of what are like our global variables. So these are colors out of a color palette that you have here. So it sounds crazy to define something like white, but it's nice because if as long as you use the variable for white every place you want white, if you decided that you wanted to change the definition of white in your project, so like you wanted it to be like slightly off-white or like slightly gray, you just change it in one place and it makes it way easier. It's also common that you would have these variables defined in another file. I was just making this quicker by putting it all in one file. So these are just a whole bunch of variables. So for things like colors, Text color, specifically fonts. You can call your font families, your font weights, all in variables to keep them consistent. You can set your text styling or your text sizing, excuse me, in consistent variables so that people don't just decide like, you know, I think this header should be like 1 pixel bigger than it is. It keeps everything just like consistent across the board. You can set up standard like border radiuses, all that kinds of stuff. So this is where SAS gets really cool. So this probably looks like a standard CSS rule minus the like variable values for the rules. Like it looks like a standard CSS rule, right? And then you come down here and you're like, wait, there's an ampersand. There's an ampersand in my CSS. What is happening? So ampersand is actually, what it does is it literally means take the rule above it and tack this onto the end. So I actually have the compiled output. So CSS preprocessors, you write the SCSS and then it actually compiles into straight CSS for you. So this thing on the right here is the compiled version. So this ampersand primary actually compiles out to button underscore primary. So what this is doing is it's letting me basically create, I have a generic button class that I want certain things to be like assigned to, right? So I can use this button class for all of my buttons. And these are the things that like all of my buttons have in common. And then I can set variations on my buttons really, really easily. So instead of having to say, instead of having to say I have a primary version of my button and I have to type out, you know, .btn underscore primary, and then add my variations, I can just essentially set this up so that you can tack on those styles. And then it's like, well, actually I have one label, like one thing nested even further than that because I need a disabled style for my primary button. So I can add this disabled class onto my primary button. And that spits out this whole rule for me. So instead of having to type out what's like a rule, like a selector that's twice as long, this lets me use like more verbose, like longer, but more descriptive selectors without having to constantly type them over and over and over again. Which is because it's useful to have the information, right? It's useful from a human perspective to be able to read and be like, that says button underscore secondary. But if I had to type that every single time I needed a secondary button in my styling, I would pretty quickly figure out a way to be like, maybe I can figure out a way to make it like button underscore sec, like, or something to like make it shorter, which is useful like from a typing standpoint, but it's less human readable and it makes it harder for your code to like be followed. So, and then the same thing, I have a disabled rule in here. This nesting feature is super useful though, because like if I needed, say I wanted to have a hover state on my primary button. And I was just like, my hover state's gonna be pretty drastic. And I'm just gonna make my hover state to be black. I'm not using a variable in here because I just don't have a ton of variables attached to this file. So I can just save, actually, hold on, I will save this, but I have, so SAS also has this feature. I set this up for like a very simple project in terms of like this, all that is in this project is these two styling files. The cool thing is you can very easily attach SAS like into your React compiling process. So like you can add SAS onto a React project really, really easily, so that by default, whenever you save your file, it will automatically recompile your CSS for you and like update everything. So this is just, I'm just running a thing that SAS has a watcher that basically says, what this says is, SAS, pay attention to styles.scss and compile it into styles.css. and that's all that's happening. So it says, hey, we're watching for changes. It hasn't registered that I made these changes yet because I haven't saved them yet. So now that I saved it, see how we just added another rule in here? Incredibly useful. Variables are like the absolute minimum reason that you should totally consider using SAS. There's actually a whole other world of things that it can do, including like mix-ins, where you can basically say like, I have certain styles that I need to apply to a lot of different elements that get reused over and over again. I can create what's called a mix-in for those styles, and then every place that I need that mix-in, I would go, I'd be like, I want this for all my secondary buttons. I could be like, at input, import, button mix-in. I'm just making up a name here. But it's basically, it pulls in a piece of styling code that just gets reused over and over the place, like reused over and over all over the place. Good question. So when you're linking your styling files to your HTML, you are actually still going to continue linking your CSS files. So this preprocessor piece is solely because it makes writing CSS, like it makes writing this output CSS way faster and more efficient and like easier for humans to do.
Sorry, Christy, you started to explain it and then your voice cut out and I didn't hear. You were saying answering, linking it. I didn't get all of it.
Apologies.
What's been happening tonight? Yeah.
So linking, you still link to your CSS file. You link to the output code. So if I was attaching to my CSS to my HTML, I would still link to styles.css. The styles.scss is solely because like it's easier to write it, essentially. It's essentially a utility for writing CSS that makes it easier to like keep a system and makes it faster to actually like create the styling rules. You guys will probably you'll have the option to start using SAS when you get to React, but you don't need to play with it a ton before then. I just want you to know it exists and it's a thing.
What's the icon next to it? That's just a logo, right? The icon next to style SCSS.
Oh, the
just like an S.
This little pink S. Yeah, that's a logo. So VS Code, when you use different forms of files, actually uses little icons next to it.
Yeah, because I know, the style CSS hashtag. I mean, that definitely goes with a style sheet. All right, so I don't need any symbols ahead of the SCSS. Okay.
No, you don't have to add anything. It just is it's just part of VS Code. We have a tiny visitor again. Hold on. Hey, who has found my exercise ball and is therefore incredibly excited about it. Hey. Come here. I know. I'm taking you away from the fun stuff.
Her timing is always perfect.
Can you say hi? Say hi. You see people? I know. You're less excited to see me than you are to see the exercise ball. All right. You have a really good night. Go to bed.
She is letting us know that our time is almost up. We hear her loud and clear.
I think it's past my bedtime too.
All right. That was all I want to show you guys about SAS. I just wanted to give you a super quick demo. That's not code you're going to need to write or anything. I just wanted you to be aware of it. All right. So design systems and styling frameworks. So a design system is essentially a custom series of components that can be reused in different combinations. So design systems make it easier for large companies to manage design at scale. A styling framework is similar. The biggest difference between a design system and a styling framework is that a design system is, generally speaking, it's created by a company for a company. So there are open source ones, like a lot of the large companies, we're going to talk about a couple of them real quick, have open sourced their design systems, and they can be pulled in and used by other people, but they're generally kind of specific to what that particular company needs. They're reusable components that company uses to build all of their applications and things like that. So as an example, Google has a design system. We're going to talk about it in a sec. A styling framework is designed specifically to be pulled into other projects. It's a code library. So similar to the fact, like the idea that React is a framework, it's a code library of JavaScript that's meant to be pulled in and used by other people to build stuff. Styling frameworks are the same way. So Bootstrap is a styling framework, and you guys are going to be using Bootstrap. It essentially takes out really common web patterns and makes them much easier to implement because they build in a bunch of CSS under the hood. All right, there's two things on this slide. One of them, I'll make this bigger for you. So one of the things on this slide is this atomic design principles. I linked to this article in the resources. There's also a link in the slide deck here. This book was written it's an ebook. It was written in 2006, but it's still incredibly relevant today. It's sort of thinking about your website design in the form of atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and pages. So thinking about it in terms of like a button would be an atom, right? Or link styling would be an atom. Or standard image styling would be an atom, right? It's these smaller pieces that then you can put together. So an input element would be an atom, and a button would be an atom, but something that was an input stepper, so where you have a plus on one side and then a negative on the other side, and it updates that would be a molecule. So where you're taking multiple atoms and smushing them together in a larger component, or a search box would be a molecule because it's an input and a button. Or a nav bar would probably be an organism because it's got a bunch of smaller pieces built into it. It's got the logo, it's got the nav links, and it has then the buttons for other things, right? And then organisms get put together into page templates, which can be reused to create pages. So it's kind of approaching design into the idea of breaking it down to its smallest pieces, so that its smallest reusable components, so that you can maximize your reusability of the code that you're writing. And it also, design systems, because they're generally specific to a particular company, often include things like color, typography, very specific spacing kinds of things, the same sorts of things you might expect out of a brand guideline from a company. If you have to ask a company for their brand guideline, that's the kind of thing you're gonna, that type of information tends to also exist in design systems. It doesn't always, but it often does. All right, quickly, we're gonna jump over and take an incredibly high level look at, so material design is actually made by Google. This is Google's design system. So they have a ton basically of documentation about how things should get used in here. And this animation is actually sort of following. You have these atoms and these molecules together, and then they're creating into different layouts following that same, like the smaller pieces build into bigger pieces, build into the whole. But there's a ton of documentation in here because you can actually pull in and use material design, and it actually gets used all over the place. And one of the styling frameworks we're going to talk about briefly actually uses material design and converts it into a styling framework. But so there's layout stuff about like how there's typical sort of like, here's the pattern we follow for laying things out. Here's how we typically do navigation, types of navigation. Here's how we typically use color. I'm not expecting you guys to memorize all of this. I'm just like kind of trying to expose you to it. It's like, this is more of what, so this is all very sort of more on the brand guideline end, but there's also a bunch of pieces in terms of code. Like there's actually a lot of code information in here as well. So you can essentially, so you've got hex code values. There's a bunch of, I'm like not running into it right now, but there's a bunch of like, there's a bunch of places where you can be like, how do I implement like material design in X language? And it like has a bunch of information about like how to implement it that way. So Carbon is a similar concept, but it's made by IBM. So we have all about Carbon. It's like, what is it? How does it work? More, I would say, philosophical stuff. But so they have stuff about how do I design with Carbon? They actually have design kits you can download into the various common like design programs that will let you use IBM as a design system. But they also have developer stuff about like, okay, how do I develop using Carbon? So in here we have a tutorial for using Carbon with React, a tutorial for using Carbon with Angular, and a tutorial for using Carbon with Vue, all three of which are common JavaScript frameworks. So just as an example of like, they're intentionally, like they're open sourcing this and like being like, here, build stuff with it. Not every company does that with their framework. So they have grid stuff built in. They have sort of how do you use icons. There's certain icons that they have built in to Carbon as a framework. They have default accordions, so like different components, right? So you can have default accordion styling. How do you style a breadcrumb? How do you style a button? How do you style a checkbox? A date picker, a table. These are all things, they're elements, right, that you run into on websites on a regular basis, that you can style them all from scratch and you can do a great job, but it takes a really long time. So if you're looking for a look and feel that's similar to the look and feel of what Carbon is providing, it's often much faster to pull in the styling that Carbon is using, right? The thing about design systems is that they're intentionally opinionated, right? They're designed with like, you can change out the color palette, right? But if you start getting to the point where you're like, you know, I want to change out the color palette, but I also really kind of wish that these buttons had more rounded edges. And I kind of wish that the hover pattern on them was a little bit different. And, you know, I like the way this accordion works, but I actually really wish that it was like a little bit different. Like at some point you can spend more time overwriting your design system, like the design system is imported, than you would be if you just started from scratch and built the things that you need. Styling frameworks have the same problem. So styling frameworks are also opinionated because you end up having to, you have to express how you want things to be styled, and they follow certain patterns based off of the people that originally wrote them. And so if you want the look and feel of what you're building to match those styling frameworks really closely, they're super great and they save you a ton of time. What'll kill you is the level of customization that sometimes people want. So when you're evaluating whether or not you should use it, implement either a design system that's already pre-built or a styling system that's like a styling framework that's already pre-built, it's figuring out how closely does this thing match the customization that I like, the look and feel that I really want, and how much customization am I going to be doing? Because a little, not a big deal. Like, but if it's like a little, but then maybe a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, at some point you spend more time overwriting stuff than you would have if you just built the stuff from scratch to begin with. So it's just one of those balance things, right? Styling frameworks work off the same sort of break things down into the reusable components pieces. But they simplify things because they're intended to be a code library. They're very easy to pull in and implement, generally speaking. The good ones have a lot of documentation about how to use stuff. And they include a lot of components for styling, the certain elements, but also page layout and things like that. So like you guys have already talked about the Bootstrap grid. We're going to talk here a little bit. So Bootstrap, like I said, it's intended to be pulled into a project and then used, right? So it actually comes with options to customize it. So you can actually create a CSS file that you can download a CSS file or a SAS file that will allow you to a whole bunch of custom variables that will allow you to have custom colors into your Bootstrap if you want. So you don't have to use Bootstrap's default colors if you don't want to. That kind of customization they make really, really easy. But you guys have already talked about grid. Actually, an interesting place to look for breakpoints. Bootstrap actually has a list of here are the breakpoints that we use. So this is probably useful for you from the standpoint of if you're going to be using Bootstrap in your project, these are the default ones. You should probably start by using these in the projects that you're doing if you're pulling in Bootstrap. It's so you're not fighting the system. But you also have the ability to pretty easily adjust these, right? Because this is using SAS. It's setting up variables for its breakpoint. Let's pull in some other stuff here just for fun. So we have grid. You guys have already talked pretty extensively about grid. 1 of 3 columns, all the different column options. So utilities are fun because this lets you easily set margin and padding on elements and things like that, which has advantages. And then there's a bunch of default content pieces. So typography, images, settings for how to style tables by default, things like that. Over customizing does defeat the purpose of having a framework. However, frameworks can be super useful when you're starting, especially I encourage you all at some point to actually come here, look through the documentation and kind of look at it with a critical eye from the standpoint of what elements are they including in their styling? Because these are things that you're going to see over and over and over again. Most of you all are pretty new to writing CSS and to styling things. But they're as you get more comfortable with styling things, I would strongly encourage you to apply your developer brain to styling and think about styling, even if you're not pulling in a design system, think about styling things in a systematic way instead of in a one-off, this is how this particular thing needs to look kind of a way. Because the more you can set series of generic rules that cover the vast majority of what you're trying to style, the easier and quicker it is to create those functional prototypes we were talking about earlier. And the less pulling in of default frameworks you might need to do, and the more you're able to basically set up your own frameworks really quickly. So, and some of it's just experience, but it's also just like thinking systematically about how you're applying styles. Like you guys are at the point where like you're really just trying to get running, right, with CSS. So like don't stress about not using intense systems now, but like once you're up and running and CSS is sort of just like, oh yeah, I need to style a thing, whatever, no big deal. Like start thinking about it then as like, oh, well, I can style this, but like, how does this fit into the larger context of the overall app that I'm building, right? How can I style this in a way that is not just useful here, but it might be useful in any other place that I might want to use this particular element. And it's just that mind shift of thinking about it, not just this instance, but like thinking about it in the many use cases, essentially.
So I'm a front loader type of thinker. I try to get all my resources together and all of that. So you're making me think about my capstone a lot in the midst of this lecture. So, you know, like I really was looking at the Wayfair and I saw that color code and that purple popped out. You know, if I'm being in education, you know, I try to get colors that are student friendly. So I'm looking at that purple. So would it be helpful for me to kind of play with SAS now to kind of get it rolling, or just wait?
If you want to play with SAS, I can send you guys I think I still have it open, the like super minimal tutorial I used to pull together that little SAS piece so you could get SAS up and running in the basic projects you're doing now. But I would say don't stress about it, because like where you guys are at right now, you're gonna have plenty of time to revisit SAS in the future. Like we just want to get you to that point where like writing CSS is like kind of second nature. Like writing HTML and CSS is sort of second nature. So that then when you mix JavaScript into it with React, it's not a big deal. So I would focus on just like being really fluent, like getting really fluent with HTML and CSS, so that once you guys are like, you're going to be jumping in pretty soon into JavaScript after next week, I think. So like, so that when you're ready to jump into JavaScript, you're able to just like dive into that completely, and then you can combine the two. SAS is one of those things that like, it's an incredibly useful tool, and like you can, if you're using React for your capstone, it shouldn't be a big deal for you to like pull it in and use it at that point. And if you have a really solid understanding of CSS, even just doing stuff like I was just showing you with pulling in variables into your, like using SAS just for the variables piece is going to be super helpful for you. So I guess what I'm saying is like, don't stress about trying to like dive in and learn all the things at once, but just focus on the basics and getting really good at the basics.
Good. And what was that mind frame like a breakpoint? I Googled, it's like a digital pause. Now you said shifting my mind frame, you know, so how do I know that my website needs a breakpoint?
So part of the breakpoint piece is kind of like we were talking about, right? Where you hit a point where the current styles are not working anymore.
Oh, okay.
And you need to make an adjustment, essentially.
Got it.
Super quickly, I want to talk to you about another really popular styling framework. So there's Materialize, which is using material design, which we were just talking about material design. So this is converting the material design system into a framework. This is a newer one, but it's also fairly popular. I wanted to talk to you briefly about Tailwind because it's only, I think, I've only heard about it in the last year or so, and it's becoming much more and more popular because it's probably the least opinionated styling framework that I've run across. So in the sense that Bootstrap has sort of like a distinctive look and feel to, say, like their buttons. Somebody that's been around the block for long enough knows that like they see these buttons and they're like, hey, it's a Bootstrap button. Because they just have a very specific like border radius and style and padding to them. So Tailwind is interesting because it's essentially a styling utility in the sense that it's intended, it's a series of classes that lets you add styling to your elements solely by adding classes to them, if that makes sense. So it's utility first in the sense that you can, so they're actually giving you two examples here. It's essentially, this is what it would look like without using Tailwind. You have these specific class names, and then you have all these rules attached to the specific class names. So with Tailwind, you essentially don't have all those specific rules. You just have these class names that add the rules onto the element just by putting the class name on the element. So like this BG-white means it has a white background. It's got extra large border radius on it. It's got a medium shadow. It's displaying flex. It's centering its items, and it's taking up a certain amount of space out of 4, which is probably 1 out of, it might actually be, oh, this is probably space extra small 4. So it's taking 4 columns out of the 12 column grid, and it's starting at extra small screens. So Bootstrap does a similar type of thing, but it also has a lot of opinionated pieces in terms of a lot of default components. And so Tailwind has fewer components and more styling classes. So in the same sense that we have button and button primary here, there's, I'm trying to pull you another example here really quick. So the best example actually of the way that Bootstrap does a similar thing is with layout and their grid. So to define your grid, all you do is you add container to say that it's the container of the grid. You add a row to say that that's a row inside the grid. And then you say column small, and column small. So you're like, this is a small column. Like, and by a small column, it's not necessarily saying it's like, it's a little column. It's saying that it's a column that starts at a small screen, and small screen refers to those breakpoints.
Christy, I have a question. Are you answering Brandy's question in the chat right now, where she said, is it similar to W3 Bootstrap?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry,
okay.
I should have mentioned that. I apologize.
Okay, then.
But so they're just different approaches, right? So if you're using Tailwind, it doesn't mean you're never going to have to write custom CSS rules. It just means that they're providing you with a whole bunch of utilities. There are positives and negatives to both approaches. The advantage of building out components that have sort of specific styles to them is that it lets you write button styling once. And then you can reuse that button class like all over the place for anything that's supposed to look like a button. With a utility first approach, potentially, if you had 6 different classes you needed to attach to a button to make it look like a button, you would have to add those 6 classes to every single button that you used. And then if you needed to go back and update them, it could be problematic. So like, there's positives and negatives to both. I'm not going to say that like one is exponentially better than the other. They're just different. There's ways you can use, like, you can minimize that potential reuse piece of like, or not reuse, but like potential duplication piece of the utility using components. But it's sort of, they're different types of Legos, right? So it has to do with like how you put the Legos together. You're going to get a slightly different result, and both results have positives to them and negatives to them. So welcome to the developer world, where the answer is most often, it really depends on your context, because it just does. And so we just want to expose you guys to as many positives and negatives to different approaches, so that when you're trying to make decisions in the specific context that you're faced with, like when you're solving problems, that you know which positives and negatives to weigh when you're making your decisions. All right, I think we officially got to the end of my slide deck with a full 3 minutes before class is supposed to be over. So questions. I only talked like a mile a minute tonight, so.
So as far as note taking, I saw that there was a button in the chat for a transcript. Is that button available for the YouTube Live or just the Zoom?
I have no idea. Dana, do you by any chance know the answer to that question?
So Corey, just to make sure that I understand your question, you're talking about here in Zoom, and you
Yep, I
saw
saw
that,
it.
and you saw the you clicked on those 3 buttons, and you're talking about that save chat, the save chat link.
Let me look again.
Well, he's looking.
It's
go ahead.
a menu item under the reactions where it says view full transcript.
So, okay, I don't have that available on my screen, but go, if you want the full transcript, it sounds like it's going to give that to you.
Okay. So I hit this button here.
Because
Oh,
what happened was when Christy first started, there was a box that came up at the bottom of our screens for us to be able to view the captions.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so what happened when you clicked on yours?
It looks. It looks.
Does-
Yeah, I got a whole transcript here.
Well, when you say you have a whole transcript, do you mean you have a file, or do you see my words appearing on the screen as I talk?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow,
Corey,
yeah.
that was two questions, Corey.
Wait. Okay, it's moving. So this is a.
So
full
you're
transcript of this whole session. So I could text.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay, great. So so then you do have access to the full transcript then of the
Okay.
closed captions.
Okay, so the only way I can access this full transcript is through Zoom, you're saying, and not YouTube Live?
That is correct. You'll have to get it through Zoom, or if you ping me and say that you want all 1 million pages, I'll have access to it after class is over with, and I can snag it for you.
So yeah, I'm a stronger reader than like viewing the videos. Do you have full transcripts of all of our lectures so far?
No, I only have access to the closed captioning transcripts from the time when it was requested that we start turning them on, and that would be for the last 2 or 3 classes, I think. I think
Okay.
they started a few days ago. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
I don't think we have one for class last night. I don't remember seeing any closed captions on my screen.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but
I'm not sure if it doesn't give you an option if you're not recording, like I think that might be part of YouTube Live, but I'm not positive.
Right. So
Didn't check.
yeah, and you know what? We've been off of YouTube Live for a few days, so I can always circle back and see if that's available.
Well, yeah, because it's working again. So I don't know, but just a quick note. I did put this in the chat, but Latanya asked about the typography book. I really do recommend that. It honestly is the best like digital and Deb specific typography resource I've ever found. That being said, if it's like $30, I think, to get his book and all the associated like digital resources. But before you spend the money on it, definitely read through his email series, which I pulled them all together. I resubscribed to it because I like took the email series a million years ago and then I couldn't find them. So I resubscribed to it recently. This is the HTML view of all of his emails. So you should be able to click through and just see the content of the email series. Take a look at these to start with. And if you're like, yeah, this is super helpful and I want more information, buy the book. Because the book is like these lessons, but fleshed out like with a bunch more information, basically. So like reading the email series really is like a good synopsis. If you're just like, I'd be willing to spend like 2 hours reading about typography. I don't really want to spend 6 to 8 hours reading about typography. Read the email series, and it's free. So you can then if you decide you like it, you can always buy the book.
I just wanted to give a parting word about the closed caption, Corey. I would advise, even if YouTube does auto-generate a closed caption, I would advise not getting or extracting the closed caption from YouTube. It's been my experience from watching past auto-generated closed caption videos in YouTube that that Zoom seems to be very, very accurate. I've been keeping an eye on it as Christy says certain big words, or as you as students say big words. I am very, very happy to see how accurate it is.
Yeah, it is. It's awesome.
It's very accurate. I have yet to see an error. I want to say maybe I saw one, and it wasn't like something that would have broken the entire sentence, because the context around it, you could still understand what was being said. But the Zoom closed captions are highly accurate, very impressive.
Cool. Does anybody else have additional questions? I think it's 7:33, or 8:33. Sorry, 7:33 here. So it's officially, the class is officially over. But if you guys have questions, feel free to stick around. If not, it's been really fun teaching you guys. And if you have additional questions for me, don't forget that you're welcome to Slack me. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Awesome.
We'll see. I guess I'll see you guys this weekend probably, but
I wish you were teaching all week, but of course then Dana would have to teach next week. So we should do like a shtick, the two together. Anyway, thank you so much.
The truth is, I actually really wanted to teach like the entirety of modules 2 and 3 for you guys. And then I did a reality check with my other half and my toddler and realized that was not going to function properly.
Oh, we definitely wanted Christy to teach the whole thing. And it wasn't a possibility. Nope. Can we just until we see Christy again, can we get everybody to throw her some parting reactions?
All right.
This is great. I enjoyed her in cohort 1 and I'm loving the repeat, Christy. Thank you so much.
Doesn't mean I'm happy you're leaving. It means I'm happy to go.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, just remember, like, if you guys run into like styling and design stuff, so you're like, what is happening here? Feel free to just send me the resource and I'll be like, yeah, this is a thing, or no, this is really outdated, or I'm not an encyclopedia, but I've realized I have a lot of experience at this point, so I'm happy to share. So
wonderful. All right. Well, I'm going to say good night to everyone. Let me check the chat first and see if there were any last minute questions here. A lot of thank yous. Happy face. Thank you, Latonia. Let's see. Latonia said, okay, Karen, download for what? The book, the course? You might have already answered that question, Christy. I'm not sure. I did hear you talking about getting the book.
I think that
Yeah.
was.
Yeah,
Right.
somebody says that they got a free download of the book.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great, wonderful. All right, and let's see. Susan is going to put her question in Slack.
I
All
will say that I actually have the print version of that book, and I would personally suggest getting the digital version, because the print version it's the only print book I've ever had that I could so clearly tell it was designed for digital and printed out by a service. So I've been kind of disappointed with it from that standpoint. The content's great. There's just the printing on it sometimes occasionally makes me think I need to have my prescription checked. So
I had to laugh at myself because in one of my responses, I put Christ advises that you focus on becoming fluent with HTML.
I
Listen,
noticed that. I
guys.
debated about giving myself a halo.
Yes.
I saw that, Dana.
I
didn't pick up on it.
The divine creator is not going to come down and help you with your projects and your capstones.
Gods of confusion.
That is my disclaimer right there. Don't leave this chat today thinking that that's going to happen because Dana said so. I have it on video. It is not going to happen. That's all. Well, everyone, you have a good night. We'll be in Slack until we see you tomorrow night.
You got it.
All
Christy,
right.
I just sent you like a random question. I'm sorry.
You sent it to me or Christy?
I sent it to Christy.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay. You all have a good night now.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
See you tomorrow. Thanks, Christy.
So your breakpoint question. So you're saying that it's stating that there's no breakpoints whatsoever. They're not. It didn't sometimes it doesn't explicitly. Sometimes it's hard to see the media queries where they show up.
Okay.
Because they just get buried in a lot of rules.
Okay.
But they generally exist somewhere.
Okay. Yeah, I just started playing with the browser, my own, and I was just kind of like, this is odd. Why is it saying there's no breakpoints? But okay. Yeah. All right, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Have a good night.